In another case, the mother of a 27-year-old man who died in his sleep claimed that Kratom killed him. The FDA associated the death with Kratom in spite of the fact that he had multiple pre-existing conditions. He had SSRIs in his system and also muscle relaxers. A 63-year-old man on multiple prescription meds smoked for 40 years and had a heart attack. Despite cigarettes being the number one cause of preventable death in the U.S., his death was attributed to Kratom. John Hardin tragically lost his wife last month and reported her cause of death as Kratom use. However, after further investigation by Thurston County coroner, Kratom was not found in his wife Wendy's system at the time of her death, and yet the FDA continued to report it as a Kratom death. One of the things that came up in terms of like the shady world of Kratom, and you can tell me if you'd rather not comment on this, but I saw an investigative report by Nick Wing from the Huffington Post. He's an investigative reporter, and he found some things on the FDA possibly misrepresenting Kratom deaths. Could I read you some stuff from that? And
Sure.
so there's an article in Nexus News, and the title is FOIA Docs, Freedom of Information Act documents show that FDA's data on Kratom deaths is propaganda. And it's on Nexus News if people want to go see it. And this is based on Nick Wing's investigative report at Nick P. Wing on Twitter. And it reads, last month, Scott Gottlieb, Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration, issued a public health advisory on Kratom, outlining concerns about its quote-unquote deadly risks. However, Nick Wing, a senior reporter at the Huffington Post, submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the Food and Drug Administration to put a second set of eyes on those allegedly deadly associations. What the FDA released under the FOIA request is now raising serious concerns about the validity and perhaps the motive for the senseless government fear-mongering. In their report, the FDA cited 36 deaths associated with the use of Kratom, but the data they released to Huffington Post showed only 8, and of those 8 reports, not a single one confirmed a death caused by Kratom. The FDA chose to associate Kratom with the person's death in the report below, despite the person having tested positive for tramadol and having a history of cardiac arrhythmia. So basically, there's screenshots of reports that were released under the Freedom of Information Act. And I can go through a few of them, but it's basically like reports associated or deaths that were equivocated to Kratom deaths where there were other things in people's systems or people had pre-existing conditions for decades that were not taken into account for whatever reason. So there was one person who had a quote unquote Kratom death where they tested positive for tramadol and history of cardiac arrhythmia. In another case, the mother of a 27-year-old man who died in his sleep claimed that Kratom killed him. The FDA associated the death with Kratom in spite of the fact that he had multiple pre-existing conditions. He had SSRIs in his system and also muscle relaxers. A 63-year-old man on multiple prescription meds smoked for 40 years and had a heart attack. Despite cigarettes being the number one cause of preventable death in the U.S., his death was attributed to Kratom. John Hardin tragically lost his wife last month and reported her cause of death as Kratom use. However, after further investigation by Thurston County coroner, Kratom was not found in his wife Wendy's system at the time of her death, and yet the FDA continued to report it as a Kratom death. So I just wanted to ask you, like, giving the FDA the benefit of the doubt, like there's no sort of conspiracy going on with the FDA, regardless of what people on Reddit say. Like, what reason would the FDA have for having an oversight with these deadly Kratom narratives? And that's if the reports and claims are totally factual. So assuming these claims are true, or like, what is the FDA missing when they're looking at these Kratom deaths based on what you've seen in the lab?
Yeah, so I can't speak for the FDA or what their thought process is or what they're doing. I can only speculate as to what's going on. But first, I will say I'm very familiar with all of those cases that you mentioned, and for sure, there's very few, if any, um, deaths that have been linked solely to kratom, and those that have been linked solely to kratom, it's unknown if there was other substances that were adulterants in that kratom at the time. And so one of the things that we constantly um, um, came across in many of the death reports was fentanyl on board. And so fentanyl derivatives have creeped up everywhere. Fentanylogs, many of them are called, and they're more potent than fentanyl. And so if many of the deaths that were attributed to kratom were actually found to have fentanyl in them, or they were found to have benzodiazepines or other substances present, muscle relaxers, SSRIs. Those were some of the low-hanging fruits of what's going on, and we need to look at what drug herb interactions are happening between these. And we do know that some of the same metabolism pathways that are being used by the kratom alkaloids are used by prescription medications, particularly antidepressants, opioids. And so the fact that you could end up getting a potential drug interaction or drug herb interaction that would enhance levels to dangerous levels in your body that normally wouldn't be dangerous if you were just taking one or the other, but combining them becomes problematic. This is what's there. Now, I'll come back to the fact that we just don't know the few cases where they said it was kratom only. We just don't know what else was in that kratom sample that person ingested, and unfortunately, we don't have the sample to go back and do forensic analysis on to see if there was any adulterant or contaminant in there. I mentioned we just did a huge screening of hundreds of kratom samples, and we did look for adulterants in those, and we did not find adulterants in any of them in
Wow.
the marketplace. So that was another
That was
good.
recently?
That was recently. We haven't published that yet, but that was another good feeling piece to us that there seems to be a good supply. And that as soon as I go and say that, then somebody's going to screw it up, and we'll have a report out
No,
in the
I'm
next few
not, I'm
months.
knocking on wood, so it's not gonna happen.
So I mean, hopefully that won't happen, of course. But it was good. We got the largest screen of products across the United States that's ever been conducted, and the consistency in the marketplace is pretty impressive, and that was a surprise to us. But coming back to the FDA, and again, the FDA's mission is to protect our population, to protect our citizens, and when they don't understand something, the propensity to err on the side of caution is high, and in their mind, I think, I don't know for sure, I'm speculating, but I think that when you tie an opioid narrative to a product, and we've already gone through that early in this conversation, but when there's an opioid active substance out there available that's unregulated, um, it becomes a health concern. Whether or not it's understood at the time is irrelevant. It becomes a concern that the FDA rightfully should be looking at to protect our
Mm,
population, right? And so I don't think they're doing anything in a malicious, evil way. They're trying to underscore and make draw attention to the fact that this could be problematic, right?
hmm
Um, and the fact that I think there could be some um, there could be some reasoning that they have to try to focus it more on kratom than the other substances that were together, just to make an awareness and heighten the danger that could be out there. I don't know. Like I said, I'm not the FDA, and I'm definitely not talking to people at the levels that were speaking for the FDA on this. So I really think it comes down to the fact that here we are in the middle of an opioid crisis. You've got another potential opioid-like substance that's out there. What should we do? What should we do to protect the public? And I think that's where they come from. At least I'd like to believe that's where they come from. Of course, there's people that have other thoughts.